Hi there, I'm Emily. I'm in my final year of my German Studies degree at the University of Reading. So I'm here to talk to you today about some frequently asked questions that we get about the languages degree, either from you guys on the chapter student service that we have, through visit days, open days, things like that. Just to give you an idea of what other people are asking, give you some answers to questions that you may have currently and you're not sure where to ask them, and just to give you an overview of what studying languages is like at the University of Reading. So our first question is how many students tend to be in each of the four main languages, so Spanish, French, German and Italian. And obviously this really does depend on your year group that you're in, on the class that you're taking, because we have different modules, so each module might have more or less students doing those. But I have to say, in each of the classes I take, especially the language classes, it's the perfect size. So for me, in German, this year there's roughly about 20 of us, and they usually split that in half for each of the language classes. But in all of our classes, there's the perfect amount. There's not too big that you can't get a word in edgeways, not too small that you feel like you're the only one there. And there's lots of other people to interact with, so that's really great. And there's also department-wide modules which may have more people, up to about 40, let's say. And then they will have additional seminar classes where we can discuss as a group. So the next question we have is what modules are available, what do I study, can you do culture, literature, film, translation? And yes, as cliche as it sounds, there really is something for everybody. So as an example, I really enjoy the history and politics side of my degree. So I choose a lot of our department-wide modules that focus on European history and politics. And then even this year I've started a new module, choosing business German, which is really exciting because firstly there's something that I really enjoyed and I've specialised in that I've taken, but there's also something that I never thought I'd study that is available to me as well. So there's a wide range of stuff that I've really enjoyed in the department. I took an introduction to linguistics module in my first year. I've taken film literature modules, so there's a lot available there. And yeah, there's lots of great options to pick and you can tailor it really to what suits you best. So we have a question about what a typical week looks like for me as a languages student, timetable wise. So as you can see from my example timetable, this is from this week. So I usually spend around 3 hours minimum per class doing the homework, and then I'll also do wider reading on top of that. But this really depends per student. That's kind of up to you with how much work you decide to put in. I have 10 hours of classes this week, which gives me plenty of time to do extra work on top of this. This week I also have a few meetings. The pink ones are to do with my work, so I do a part-time job as a student ambassador, which I schedule in here. I've also scheduled in some meetings. As you can see, we had a year abroad meeting for careers. I also had a meeting with my academic tutor in which we caught up, went through some of my modules, some concerns, any issues I had, any things I was struggling with. So that's what your academic tutor is really there for, to catch up termly, and to be there on hand if you have any issues. You can always email them or set up a meeting with them. I'm also a course rep for German for my final year, so that means I collect feedback from my fellow students and feed them back in a meeting that we had this Wednesday. I'm also doing a workshop with the careers team next week, so there's loads more stuff that I could be putting on my timetable. I did a Future Learn class, it was an additional class that our department advertised to us, and there's lots of other things that you can get involved with that can go on this timetable, but I also make sure that I schedule in breaks and time to relax and times for exercise, because it's really important to include this and not get bogged down in your work. So our next question is about how we're assessed in our languages degree. So the kind of short answer is a mixture of lots of different things. So we do exams and kind of essays as the main assessment formats, but we'll also do portfolios where you'll do little bits of assessment throughout the year, kind of to build up to this one mark. We'll do speaking exams usually at the end of the year, group presentations, solo presentations. Yeah, of course, exams and essays are a big part of that as well. And you can kind of, to an extent, tailor your modules to suit what works best for you. So for example, in my final year, I take a module called the extended essay because I much prefer writing essays. It's kind of like a mini dissertation, and that's my whole module, is that one essay. But on the other hand, I really like that in most of the modules I take, there's kind of smaller percentages that build up to the whole module grade, so there's not too much pressure on just one exam. You can also find out in advance what the assessment will be of the modules when you pick them in your module selection at the beginning of the year. So we have a great question about, do we have native lecturers in our department to the target languages, and are we taught and assessed in English or the language that we're learning? So we have lots of lecturers from all over the world, and especially in our language classes, they will usually be taught by a professor who's from that country. And I think most of the lecturers in our department are from the countries that speak our languages that we're learning, and they'll teach us usually in the Queen's English equivalent of that language, so kind of the main accent and dialect. But it's great to hear conversationally in any extra classes that we have with them their own accent, because it really gives us a kind of insight into every part of the language, not just the kind of main set one. So I really value this, that our lecturers are from all over the world, and we have some fantastic lecturers in our department. And also we're taught in our language modules, obviously in the language, and then in the culture modules it really depends on which ones you choose. So for me personally, I found in first year there were a lot more culture modules taught in English than in my final year, because they kind of teach you the foundation of your knowledge of the culture. So there were some in my first year that were taught in German, some taught in English, and this year I found that more are taught in the target language, just because your language confidence has been built up over the past few years. And similarly with assessment, so if the module is in the target language, usually you'll get assessed in the target language, but a lot of our bigger essays are usually in English. So we have a question: is the language degree tailored to teach you language or culture? So actually it's both. So we obviously are learning language on our language degree, but in my opinion, in order to learn the language properly, you really have to understand the culture as well. So you might be sat there wondering, what is culture? What is this culture module? I also wasn't really sure before I came to university what that entailed, but it's kind of these film, history, literature, politics modules that I was explaining about, so that you can really understand where the target language is spoken in all of the countries that it's spoken in, and really understand what's behind the language. It really helps on your year abroad as well, because you can understand the people and the cultural differences. It's also great if you're doing an additional language with us, because the language is the predominant part, of course, because we're trying to fast track your language ability, but you'll be reading texts about the culture and history whilst you're learning the language and the grammar, so it's kind of embedded into the course. Speaking of grammar, we had another good question about, do we study grammar at university level? So yes, we do, and I really enjoy how it's integrated into the course. So we'll learn this in our language classes, but so in my experience, we've learned a grammar point, and then for the rest of the class we've kind of tried to use it in the discussions we're having, or the text we're reading, or the articles we're discussing, so it's kind of integrated into the classes as well. So we have a question about, what campus are we on for languages, and do we have our own building? So we're actually on the main campus, the White Knights campus, which is where the library is, the Students' Union, cafes, bars, etc. And it's also where we have a couple of lecture buildings. So as with most subjects, we will have our lectures in these buildings. There's lots of bigger lecture theatres and seminar rooms as well, but we also have our own languages building. It's called the Miller Building. We have our own study space there. We have our year abroad coordinator's office there. All of the offices for the lecturers are there as well. So I actually did a tour of the Miller Building and a tour of a day in the life of a languages student around the campus, which you can find on my Chat to a Student page. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope I answered your questions, but if you do have any more questions, feel free to message me on our Chat to a Student site, and I'll be more than happy to answer any questions about the languages degree, study, life at university, things like that.